Regular meeting for November 20th, 2023. I have the time is right at 6 o'clock. If everybody would please rise and join us for the pledge.
Poster, Arch, Carry, Colors, Reason, Colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Carry, Colors. Order, Colors. Colors, Colors turn, Arch.
Thank you. We will give them a few minutes to join us back in the room. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, kind of your rank, what you like best about ROTC.
I am Cadet First Lieutenant Matthew Butler. One of the things I like about ROTC is all the leadership skills that we get out of it, all the people that we get to meet, and all the friends we get to make.
Cadet Technical Sergeant Elijah Workman. One of my favorite aspects of the ROTC program is the camaraderie that takes place while you're in the Corps.
I'm Cadet Senior Airman Audrey Nolte, and I think the most important thing to walk to me is leadership.
I'm Cadet Airman Zoe Workman, and I think the most important thing about ROTC for me is all the friends that make that turn into basically family for me.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, y'all.
Moving on to the next item. Karen, roll call, please.
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Mrs. Cope?
Here.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Here.
Mrs. Dalton?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Item number 4, adoption of the agenda. Need a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 5, communications reports. Do we have any hearing of the public tonight? Anybody sign up to speak tonight? No? Okay.
Can we just pick somebody?
Just call on the Wilson twins to talk to us for a little. No.
There are plenty of students here this evening.
They could all get up and talk a little bit. That's right.
Is this a class project?
Yeah, they're Teacher Academy students, correct? So they're in our Career Center partnership class with Teacher Academy, so they have to come and learn about board meetings and things like that as well, so.
Only the ones that are getting punished have to attend the meetings.
Yeah. The rest are watching at home. Reminder to you guys, you need a signature from me before you go, so see me after the meeting, so.
B is the student board member update. Alexa Lane.
Good evening. The first thing on the slideshow is Senior Spirit Day. On Halloween Day, seniors were able to dress up. There were a lot of creative costumes. One of my personal favorites was somebody dressed up as Mr. Lavelle and had his ID, so I thought that was pretty funny. Earlier this month, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the high school marching band performed at the Bands of America Grand Nationals. It was at Lucas Oil Stadium, as you can see. As far as I know, they had great success, and it was a great way to wrap up their season. Last week, there was NHS inductions. 79 upperclassmen were inducted into the LHS chapter of National Honor Society. Science teacher Mr. Hilkert was recognized for exhibiting the NHS pillars, and Natasha York performed a song. Earlier this month, it might have been last month, was signing day. We had 9 Lady Warriors sign national letters of intent to continue their sports at the collegiate level. There's a list of names on the slide. I'm not going to read them because it might take a while, but where they're going, what sport, and their names are on there. And then just some extracurricular news. After school, Leo's Club spent time at the Station Hill Nursing Home. They just interacted with some people that were there, and they did some arts and crafts, so I thought that was pretty cool. And then Student Council raised around $1,200 for Pink Ribbon Girls, and they also donated supplies to the schools throughout the district with extra money they had raised over the past couple years. And then seniors Elena Wilson and Calvin Kilgallen raced at the state meet for cross country. They both placed really well. They had really good races. And Elena was also recognized to be on the Ohio cross country team. And she ran in that meet this past weekend. And then Lebanon High School was recognized on the College Board AP Honor Roll. We got an award for it. So just some facts about it. Over 4,000 schools, or 30% of eligible schools, were recognized for this honor. We were the only school in Warren County to get this award, which was pretty cool. And then out of the 1,300 schools across Ohio, only 130 schools received this award, including LHS. Then some upcoming events next month. Loud in the Library is Thursday, December 15th. And then there are band and choir concerts. Their holiday concerts are December 6th and 7th, and then the 11th through the 13th. And then just a little happy Thanksgiving slide to make it cute. That's all I have today.
Loud in the Library, I think, is the digital music, the electronic music concert, correct? So if you haven't seen that before, it's kind of a cool thing. It's definitely a different feel than the other band and choir and orchestra concerts, but it's a really cool program we have, so might be worth checking out.
Thank you. And Mr. Severs, you're up. Superintendent report.
Yeah, so I have one thing I think listed there, which is the legacy project. So I'm going to give you just a very brief. We've talked about this coming for a while, and I want to show a little bit of the progress that's being made on this project. So the legacy project was a fundraising effort around updating our outdoor athletic facilities and kind of bringing them up to par. We started with phase one recently, and phase one was to install turf on the field behind Lebanon High School. Previously had been just the home of Lebanon youth football. By the spring, it will be the home of men's and women's lacrosse and men's and women's soccer next fall. So they have actually broken ground. They had a lot of work done in the last 2.5 weeks before it started raining. And they told us, we're going to work as hard as we can and take advantage of November weather. And they're actually somewhat ahead of schedule with that. So I have a couple cool photos here. The second portion of phase one, which was the home bleachers down at Vandegrift Stadium here on this site. And tonight we have some things back in the treasurer's area in terms of transferring some money, but we have finalized some designs for that and believe that that should be installed prior to next fall, beginning of football season. So this is an aerial view. One of the neighbors in the neighborhood behind the high school there, kind of off of, out off of, what would that be, 42. They fly their drone. They sent us some photos. You can see they've cleared out the facility. There's a rectangular line there kind of inside. The fence posts are already in the ground, so there'll be a concrete curb that goes down. The fence posts will be sunk in that concrete curb, and they're going to start doing some sub-base work and things like that. You'll notice on the left-hand side here, just kind of as a, there are some large piles of dirt off to the left of this photo. There was a lot of really good topsoil there, and so we asked them to haul the topsoil onto that field next door so we could utilize it to either level that field out or other places. Should be a cost savings to the plan for this project as well, because they just ran 3 trucks out the gate, back, dumped it. It was a continuous loop for 2 or 3 days, instead of having to haul all that dirt off-site. So that should be a cost savings to us as well. And then last week, we have some cool video footage. They came in and removed these light poles. So you'll see in this upper left-hand picture, there's a truck right here, and you'll notice beside there's a giant light pole. The light pole is actually on what will be the new, playing surface. So they brought a crane in, got those out of the way, and beginning to work now, just kind of getting that up to date. So phase one is underway. We'll kind of keep posting updates along as we go, but they're making really good progress. And board, I've been sending a weekly update. It's not much, but it kind of gives you a track of what happened in the last week. And then the other part of this is Vandegrift Stadium, the bleacher decision. You'll notice, just for those of you who've been to a lot of games, there's a lot more empty space below the bleachers, a lot less concrete pillars and steel beams, and so that becomes much more usable. We specifically went with some designs to go around the light poles that are there, but also trying to stay within some code requirements for how high it can be and how far back from the fence it has to be, to try to not have to basically go ask any special permission from neighbors or get permission from city in those zoning opportunities. So this is maybe slightly going to be modified before it's over with, but this will stretch a long ways from end zone to end zone pretty much. And it will be probably 10 to 15 feet taller than the current stadium that's out there. So it's going to be a very nice facility, and will open up next fall. So that's Legacy Project. We did have a meeting last week with a campaign group with that, and beginning the fundraising efforts now, and trying to just finalize our game plan for how to approach the fundraising efforts with that, and businesses to start with and things like that. So we're nearing the beginning phase of the next phase of that. I have two other things I wanted to communicate when I have the mic here for a second. One, there's an annual requirement, and I need to file a report with the Ohio Department of Education soon, so I'm going to make sure I talk about this real quick, and then I can take this and submit it tomorrow. Annually, we need I ask for the Food Service Department to send us a letter that says we're complying with the federal lunch standards and guidelines, and also following board policy. So I have my letter from the interim food service director that basically we're enforcing the nutrition standards and requirements of Ohio Revised Code, and that's in anything that we sell. So my kids want to know when we're going to stop selling the reduced fat chips in the lunch line. They want all the fat, but that's because that's the standards that we have to comply with. So those things, everything we sell, and if we were to offer vending machines, would all have to comply with that. So this is a statement that we are doing so, and by me talking to you at the board meeting, consider yourself fully informed that we're complying. And then the last thing is just something I want to say publicly before we communicate with our community on this. Our communications director is out right now on medical leave, which has made moderating and responding to social media and things like that more challenging. And so we are going to communicate through social media and with our families that we're going to begin and institute that as a one-way communication channel and not allow comments and messaging. There are ways to contact the school district through other email accounts and things like that as well. And so we're going to reintroduce the purpose for the social media accounts, which is to share the good news of what's happening in our district and to share the stories of what's happening. But there are options through Facebook, and there are options that we've chosen in the past at times to allow comments or not allow comments. It's at this point in time really challenging to moderate that without the staffing, and also leads to other concerns down the road. So we want to make sure we're in the right place with that. Unless the board objects, it's my intention to make that one-way communication and to communicate to our families that we'll be making a change. Probably we'll start it like on a date and let them know ahead of time. So anybody object to that or any questions about that? Okay, thank you.
Would, when she's back, then the comments will be turned back on.
We'll evaluate that at the time and see if that's something that needs to happen. So one of the things that, as we discussed this and consulted with our attorney, their advice at this point in time actually is that we do not allow comments, just because of the requirement then to communicate back and forth if the messaging comes in through that. And also, there are standards for, effective use of it in terms of what we allow and what we don't allow. But then we get into the place where we're moderating, and that just puts the district in a bad spot as well. So it had become very time-consuming for one person to do. We have a lot of different channels, and so to do that effectively, it also opens us up to some things potentially down the road if it's something that we allow. So at one point in time, our district did not allow comments on social media. It was only one-way communication, and so. Okay.
Okay. D is the board committee report. So the first one's the student achievement liaison, Mrs. Dalton.
Okay. That's okay. I've changed the format a little bit on, at least for this month, because in reviewing the principal reports that they put out every week on what's happening within the schools, I saw a lot of consistencies going on, which I think is a good thing because some of the programs we're standardizing across all the schools, especially if a family has students in each school, they can get a consistent theme and a consistent message. And obviously, what I've seen in a lot of the reports would be our mission, which is to be reflective, responsible, and respectful. And that is kind of being shared with all of the buildings, which I think is very good, that we all know what our purpose is. So what I've done, instead of reporting on each individual school, I've looked at first the school as a district and the programs that are going on and the collaborative effort within the schools. So one of the programs is the Urban Educational Consulting Group that's come into especially Barry and
Bowman and Donovan.
Okay,
Yeah.
those three to start. And they're working with the teachers and the staff on behavioral leadership and giving them some examples. They're even just reviewing what they see and then offering suggestions to work with the students. And from what I've seen, it's been very positive.
Great stuff. Yeah, we had a consultant that came in from, Scott Irvin is the gentleman involved, but he sent a consultant that flew in and spent time in each building evaluating teachers' implementation of the program, and it's achieving great results in terms of behavioral leadership and positive interactions with kids, so.
Good, good. And maybe we'll have more updates on that.
Yeah.
As the principals go throughout the year and start applying some of the things that they've learned. And then there still is a focus on positive referrals as a way to communicate with parents and guardians and to really include them in the educational process with their students. And it just opens the line of communications between students, parents, and teachers. And then this month coming up in December is a big month for orchestra, band, and choir concerts. Pretty much throughout most of the schools, there's a lot of presentations going on.
Yeah, be a busy month in the auditorium.
Yes. So, and then at two of the schools, Barry and Bowman, they have a new program, which is the Student Volunteer Corps, which there are a few students from each class that will develop some leadership and peer-to-peer leadership within their classrooms on positive behavior, which is the focus, with probably even the urban consulting.
Yeah, so I want to take a second to comment on that because you may have seen or gotten some questions about that. It's actually Bowman, Donovan, and Barry will all begin implementing this. These were students that were selected by their staff members, Irvin Educational Consulting. They really wanted them to choose no more than 2 per class. They're looking for, and kind of just really empowering them to serve and to volunteer and lead their class. It comes with responsibility, but it also comes with some opportunities to do some really cool things. And so how do we teach kids? It's really about focusing back on the kind of the goal and the mission of being respectful, responsible, and reflective, but that responsibility piece. And so if we have kids that are being responsible, modeling some of that for their peers, and they get some leadership, and they get to do that as well. So it's very intentional. Starts kind of with helping to clean up your lunch table when you're done, doing things like that become people that are servant leading as well. And so if you have some questions around that, we try to communicate it to families really well and send letters home to those that have been nominated for it by their teachers. It's totally voluntary, but it's actually kind of, we hope they will see it as an honor that they've been selected. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me. We'll refer them back to the building principals for that. But I think it has an opportunity to be a very powerful tool in a program that I think kids will want to be a part of, not seen as a punishment.
I think that we will probably see the results of all this within the next few years as these students grow up and get to junior high, and now they won't have all potential issues that you were trying to address in the junior high because they've been taught a lot of these things at a younger age.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
That's the plan. So, and then the next thing is logic of English. So there's a focus on effective test taking, long-term academic success, and literacy strategies across all the subjects. So instead of just focusing on literature class or English class, they are working these strategies through science and social studies and math, and teaching students how to effectively take tests, look for definitions, look for what to focus on, and to work through problems. So that's a positive thing. And then there's a teacher exchange program that's occurring at some of the schools, and that's to encourage some cross-training or at least give teachers the opportunity to try something other than their current subject so that they can increase their skill level.
Yes, we're trying to get staff members to see maybe outside their building what's taking place in other buildings and how strategies are being implemented, make it more professional learning type of opportunities, and they can go and see what's happening there. So totally voluntary as well.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is a lot of professional development going on within all the school buildings. So to keep everything fresh and current and exciting for teachers and students. So, and then a few highlights that are taking place. Donovan has a 3rd grade hearing and vision screening on December 3rd. And Barry has the Talbert House working on a few programs on bullying and bystanders, upstanders, or those are the students that kind of help to address bullying by standing up for people, and they're teaching them ways to do that. And then the Lebanon Junior High School just had their high school rock live performance, and at the high school, we've standardized the honors classes. So 9th grade will now be a weighted class, and instead of having honors classes named different things, whether it's accelerated or, what was the other term? There were 3 terms, but they're all going to be called honors now, just to simplify it and make it clear. And on a positive note, in addition to what Alexa was saying about the honors program at the high school, nearly half of our senior class was enrolled in 1 or more AP classes last year. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, it's great. Mr. Lane and I sat beside each other at Schoolhouse Rock. There may have been some singing along with some of our favorites. Good thing they weren't recording us during that, but it was a good show. So congratulations to the kids. Thank you, Mrs. Dalton.
Okay, thanks.
All right, moving on to CAT Committee, Mr. McCutcheon.
So the CAT committee is the Community Audit and Advisory Committee, and this committee meets quarterly with Mrs. Irvin, and twice a year we discuss the 5-year forecast, which I think I'm the only person that finds that really exciting, but I love the 5-year forecast. I have old copies and I look at them. The other 2 times when we meet, we discuss other issues like the 10-year capital improvement plan. We give her a lot of input about the yearly financial reports, state laws, how the legislature affects things. But we did meet last Thursday at 7 a.m. I spent 6 minutes waiting to cross left into the parking lot. Present was Chris Johnson, Bill Haynes, Mike Faulkner, Mike Gliotti, along with our treasurer, Mrs. Irvin, Mike Lane, and myself. Like I said, we spent the majority of the time talking about the 5-year forecast, and I won't go into a lot of details because I think Karen's going to do that. The reason I had mentioned what CAC actually is at this meeting, Mrs. Irvin was still working on the 5-year forecast and had questions for the group about what numbers should we input. So we weren't really going over the numbers. I don't think they were quite finalized, but her asking the community questions like, we know the real estate taxes are being reevaluated. This is what the auditor said. Should we do a 3-year average and present that to the board? Should we just do this, that? We added all-day kindergarten into the numbers because that's what we're heading. And I think that's really neat that when she reaches out, especially to Chris and Bill and Mike, the 2 Mikes, and asks their opinion of what numbers should go in there. Having done this for 2 years, I now understand when she says this is only as good as the paper it's written on, especially dealing with the Ohio General Assembly. We're looking at numbers 5 years down the road, and I think it was House Bill 187, where they were discussing, instead of using a 1-year average, using a 3-year average to evaluate real estate taxes. That has a pretty significant impact on 5 years looking down the road. And even Mike Gliotti pointed out, we're looking 5 years down the road. We're still waiting for this year's evaluations and a 5-year guess, but there's going to be another one in 3 years. So, but we did spend a great deal of time on that. The good news is the numbers look good, and it appears that we will be able to push back a couple years on asking for a new money levy, which is really, really, we're hoping. It also appears that the substitute levy, where we discussed capturing real estate taxes as an increase with new development, those numbers are starting to show up too. Which I was just tickled to death with the 5-year forecast, but I won't get into much more than that. She'll go through the numbers, but this was the first time we did it where she didn't have the numbers finished and was asking us, what do you guys think? This is what Springboro's done, and the committee got to be a part of putting all that together, which was great. So that's it, sir.
That's it. Thank you. Legislative Liaison, Mrs. Cope.
Well, as seems to be the case lately, there's a lot of things that are still in committees, still may have passed the House or the Senate. A few things that that kind of came to my attention is House Bill 214. It's a policy it's adopted a policy regarding expectations for staff members, that you can't require them to give opinions about beliefs, affiliations, ideals, or principles. Another thing is Senate Bill 29 would mean that a school district would have to provide to the public information regarding their technology providers that they use. And then just local, I thought this was interesting because this is regarding our local Senator Steve Wilson in the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee. He has asked to require the new standards for financial literacy and entrepreneurship in grades 9 through 12 to include a free market capitalism content. So that's about all that I've seen that was really kind of pertaining to us, that has, seemed to have some promise. Everything else is really in committee and going back and forth.
Okay. And last but not least, Warren County Career Center, Esther Larson.
We will be meeting this coming Thursday, so I have more to report after that. The main thing is the bond issue that was on the ballot unfortunately did not pass. And so that will be one of our big discussions on how do we move forward in the future and still meet the needs of the 250 children that we were not able to help this past year. So we'll be making those decisions soon.
Didn't fail by much.
No, when you consider it was countywide.
Yeah,
What, 1,500 votes?
Yeah.
Something about
It
12
was.
to 1,500 votes.
yeah. And I think in talking with Mr. King, you're able to aggregate kind of where it was defeated really, around what areas, and so,
Well, the need is still there.
Yep,
The
absolutely.
need for more space and more up-to-date facilities. These students are expected to go into the workforce, working with the newest equipment, and as a career center, we need to provide that.
Yep. One thing I forgot to mention during the update on the turf project at the high school, all of that dirt that was piled up over there on the one field, we've actually been in communication with the Career Center's heavy equipment program. And we thought, how are we going to get this spread? What are we going to do with it? We don't want to lose this good topsoil. We reached out to them. They got back with us today and said they're absolutely interested. They would. We're not far from the Career Center. It'd be great actual hands-on learning experience for them as opposed to just pushing dirt around out there on their own facility. So I think that'll be a great way for us to even get some engagement from student, or, and I think that's a lot of the adult ed type of stuff, even in some of those programs as well. So we have a plan, hopefully, for some partnerships with the Career Center on moving that dirt around now that it's out there, so.
Good idea.
That's all I have.
Item number 6 is to approve the approval of the minutes and signing from the regular meeting October 16th. We have a motion to approve.
Moved.
Second?
Any comments or questions on the minutes as presented? Roll call, please.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes?
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 7, financial consent items. I need a motion to approve items A through K. If I did that right earlier today.
So moved?
Second.
Thank you. Mrs. Irvin, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I included some slides here that you saw back in November of '21 when I started, just as a little reminder, because this forecast came in so much different than what I provided you 6 months ago. And I just kind of wanted to give you this funny little reminder. A forecast really is just a snapshot in time. I take a picture of right now, in this moment, what we know. And as you know, anything and everything can and will change in the 6 months that it takes for me to have to do another one of these. So I just wanted to remind you, this is just a prediction. It is what I know at this moment. So 6 months ago, I had no idea what these property taxes would land at. And so it's not that I'm changing these numbers, it is the state of our environment has changed. And so I'll try to, as we walk through that, I'll try to give you some of those pieces, those big nuggets of what did actually change. But just giving you an idea, this is just a snapshot. And tomorrow, the House could come together and decide to push through something out of their committee and into Senate, and the Senate could approve it, and it could change everything about this forecast. So just being cautious about how we use the forecast. And just as a quick reminder, why do we do this? Because we're required to do this. The state requires that we do this twice a year, and we're required to provide them something that shows we're looking at our finances. We know what the impact is going to be in this year, but also we're looking more than just this year. We're looking for additional years out so that we have a really good idea. If we're consistently overspending what we're receiving, we probably need to address that in the next 5 years. So it gives us a way to really look at that. So this is just a picture of what we had last month. This was the May 23 forecast. You'll see the green box there is the fiscal year 24, which is what we're in. And we were ending the year in 2027 with about $3 million carryover balance. As you can see, that orange gold line consistently goes down, which means every year we're spending more than we're receiving. Last year, we barely made it over. It was about $200,000 that we collected more than we spent. This year was our first year that we were going to start deficit spending, which is really important. When you talk about 5 years, those expenses just keep getting bigger exponentially as opposed to revenues, which are pretty static usually. So we knew at the time we were going to make some significant changes. So brace yourself. There's our new one.
You ready?
Yes. Okay, so green box, we moved 2024 back a year. We took off 22 and we added 28. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on here that we're going to talk about, but at the end of this 5-year period, first off, please notice this is still a downward trajectory. We are still budgeting as if we're going to get a deficit spend this year and every year thereafter. So I'm curious to see how that will land. But at the end of this 5-year period, we're looking at about $9.5 million. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about, this is just side by side what these two look like. So if you'll notice, if you look at 27 versus 27 on the bottom, you'll see it's 1 over on the November. Those balances look very different. So we're in May thinking about $3 million. Now we're looking at the same year, 2027, to end with about 14.8 million, so about 15 million. Now that's over the next 4 years. So let's talk really quickly about what didn't change. There's not a whole lot of them that didn't change. The first one, we're deficit spending still this year and every year thereafter. That didn't change. The downward trend didn't change. We're losing cash balance every year of this forecast. And we are ending the 5-year period with a positive, which I didn't think was going to be a reality for us. So that's great news. Let's talk about what did change, because obviously there's a lot going into this. One of the biggest changes you'll see here is the impact on property taxes. Without getting into a lot of technical information, our district is at the 20 mil floor. And state code allows a school to get to the 20 mil floor, but doesn't allow us to collect any less than that. So once we're there, we're capped. We cannot get less than that. That means anything that increases on property values, we will get that change for residential property. So back in May, I was budgeting about 11.5% increase in property values. The latest word is it's 23%. It doubled. It literally doubled. So my advisor said this is the equivalent of about adding a 4 to 5 mil levy to your revenue. So that is the biggest bulk of this change, is simply we doubled property tax values for the reevaluation. That doesn't talk about the changes that are occurring this year or the off years as well. So as property values continue to rise, we're going to see these kind of changes.
So Karen, that is based off the estimate right now of next year's reappraisal that the county auditor does, right?
Correct.
Warren County happens next year. Butler and others around us happened this
Correct.
year. So that's what we're being told to estimate, that's through the auditor's office.
And they were higher than 23, right?
Butler,
He said,
and
yeah, the other counties were
like
30 plus.
35% increases
Yeah.
in some places.
So
Over
this
40.
is a big change. Now, this also means legislators are looking closely. So Mr. McCutcheon talked a little bit about some of the House bills that have been proposed, and they're dealing with this right here. Our district is one of those. Because we're at the 20 mil floor, we're going to see a lot more revenue come in once our values go up. Well, how do you protect the residents with that? That's the question that the legislators have been pondering for a while. Some of those challenges they presented with things that will really hurt us. A lot of our school boards in the county, in the state even, have went to Columbus and said, hey, listen, you can't do that. It'll do this, this, and this to us. It's been very effective. I will ask, please continue that legislative outreach because they want to hear from our board members. One of the things that I proposed at the CAP committee, they've talked about presenting a 3-year average instead of, so currently, Mr. Nolan will take last year's sales and the first quarter of the new year, and he'll look at that to evaluate the actual value of property. The legislature was looking to see, can we do a 3-year average? So take the last 3 years, average that out, and that's your increase. Well, as you might imagine, that's going to reduce some areas significantly. So I talked with the Springboro treasurer, and her average was about 16%, as opposed to what we're projecting at 23. I did our average is about 20%. So if the legislature does put something into place with that particular thing, I've overestimated because I did put in 23%. So those are the things that I'm a little anxious about in presenting you these numbers because that could really change at any point in time if the legislature says we're going to do this. I can tell you right now, the biggest things they're considering are freezing property taxes for people who are age 70 or higher that own homes. They're also looking at certain other extensions of homestead if you've owned your home long enough. So those are the directions they're going currently, but this is a year and a half into they want to do something about this. So that could look like they move the floor. Again, that changes everything about these numbers. So things that I hesitate to do. So Mr. McCutcheon mentioned all-day kindergarten. I did not actually put that in here because what I wanted to provide with you is the base. Here's your floor. So what we do with our wages is a very similar concept. We put in 1%. Well, if you know anything about our economy right now, 1% are not the average of our surrounding districts. But it provides you a very consistent, here's what the baseline is, so that we can go out. I looked back at our estimated costs for all-day kindergarten. This was done our curriculum director did this back in February, so we'll have completely new updates. We're going to take a look at this over the next few months. But the first year was going to cost about $1.7 million in just the first year. The annual cost thereafter would be about $1.3 million. So again, knowing that the growth is exponential here, we would be able to do it, but it's also going to decrease that, or rather increase that cash spend, right? Decrease our cash balance. So what we're going to do, this is the forecast I wanted to present to you. With this forecast, I'm going to go back, our cabinet's going to come back to the table. Let's talk about all day, everyday kindergarten. Let's talk about, we have some curricular needs. Let's talk about buildings, facilities, growth, enrollment, kind of capture all that, bring it to you all, and I'd like to bring it back to CAC and say, here are our options. If we have to do a property tax levy, if we have reductions, one of the things CAC was talking about was what happens when our levy millage changes. So we have some debt in a few years that will be reduced. So the property tax value that I pay as a resident will come down because our debt payments come down. So I'd like to give you some good, if we do it in this year, what will it cost? Can we sustain it? And then how will it impact our actual taxpayers? And look at the impact of property tax levy to our forecast, income tax versus all-day kindergarten and any other supporting things that we're going to need, like buildings, growth, those kind of things. Does that make sense?
So one of the things that we are looking at our deadline for submittals was last Friday, around some strategic planning, and began a process of strategic planning. One of which was an aspect of that was to look at facilities, our current facilities, how much more capacity could they handle as we grow, and to have a plan for that. And so all of that, I think, really needs to be factored in here. Like, this looks really good, but if we continue to get more kids every year, right, how do we address that with either more teachers that are needed? We're looking at adding intervention specialists, special education teachers every year because that population continues to grow. And so sometimes it's just trying to keep up with the students that we have instead of not adding programs. One of the things that we have identified, we've talked about this even as a board, as an administrative team, is it's been a while since a district has done wholesale textbook or curriculum adoptions. Those things were on a regular basis, financial challenges of the past, and now we're just kind of chasing what's the next problem. Oh, I need a new science book here, and so we buy that, as opposed to saying, what's the right place, what do we need? And so if we can set aside money for that, which I believe is, that's a great use of this. We have some places that's needed. And then also, so I want to, is all-day, everyday kindergarten a thing that will be discussed? Absolutely. We were looking at that down the road because we realized that was going to cost more money, and we would tie it to something else down the road. If it's a possibility now, temper some expectations. There's no way that can happen next school year, because that would be adding staff and modifying some space at Bowman. So we're already, 6 months, 7 months away from the end of school, so let's not get too excited about that. But that would be something I think would be a great, options for us to discuss. So
some of the other things that changed here, obviously the state foundation formula changed. So they looked at our local capacity, our property taxes, our individual wealth, that changed. One of the big changes was the inputs. So they took the average, just as an example, the average salaries of each of the positions. They were using fiscal year 18 numbers as calculating those averages. Well, as you can imagine, those were a little bit off. So they've updated that to fiscal year 22, makes a big difference. They've increased transportation funding from 37.5% to about 42%. And then we were at a 33% phase-in for our foundation formula. In total, it is now at 50%. This is another area that I, as a treasurer, get really anxious about because we're at 50%, but they could cut our funding tomorrow, or they could say, yep, we're going to go ahead and bump you up to 67%, and then eventually 100%. That changes everything about this forecast, right? So that's one of those big, big variables in the next 2 years as we're talking through state budgets. Property tax and foundation formula changes everything about our assumptions.
How much lead time do you usually get on that formulation, how much time?
Once it passes.
Yes, like do you get 2
What-
years, or do they say that was from the previous 6 months? Because do they run ahead or behind?
they're behind usually.
Yeah.
So,
They're like, oh, we forgot, we're not
So,
gonna pay you.
so the phase-in happens in the biennium budget. So we're in year one of a 2-year governor's budget right now. And that's what took it to 50% instead of the 33%. So, I mean, we didn't know where they were going to end with this budget until it passed the day, the day
So the
of.
first year, it's like immediate. Second year, we know unless they,
Like next year, we know we're going to get
Modify
50% of the amount we're supposed to receive on the phase-in. But then
50% of what we thought we were gonna get?
50% of what the
I think
formula
it goes
says
up
we
to
should
the
get.
67 next
Oh,
year.
okay.
50 is this year, 67 I think is next year.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we don't know. So here's a really good example. One of the things that I did include in here, our gifted funding changed. And we currently use that to support our AP classes, our CCP classes, with our regular teaching staff. We're no longer allowed to do that. That changed as of October 1st. We didn't hear about that because the state hasn't put out guidance yet. until our gifted coordinator went to a meeting and she found out about it. And we've been contacting ODE and my OASBO group to find out more details. Well, they've said, for sure, you have to change it for this school year. You can no longer use it to support those teachers for CCP or AP classes. You have to have additional personnel or additional resources. So we have less than the full school year to figure out that challenge, except they said we can roll over the money. Well, if we roll over all of the money, then we have to spend all of it or chance losing it in a single year versus over a 2-year period. So some of these changes just are go, run. So that is something we've included here, and we'll be meeting and having some further discussion about what does that look like? Are we gonna hire more gifted intervention specialists? Are we going to buy equipment? Are we gonna buy curriculum? Like, we have a lot of things to discuss based on the changes in this House bill.
And so for those of you who were around when we had gifted intervention specialists as a district, the services for those kids is really, it's modified and changed over time. In terms of what it looks like. We have a lot of students in our district who are identified as gifted, and we're serving them through acceleration plans or, different things like that. Now, this money that's in the budget needing to be spent on gifted actual services in the classroom no longer could be spent on the accelerated type of services. That's no longer considered serving through the money. It's considered serving, but it's not a way to use the money to serve. And so what we will begin to do is identify how can we have the biggest amount of impact on the most gifted students on $220,000 worth of money. And so we have some ideas already. We'll begin to kind of discuss that, but we don't get the money if we don't spend it this way, so we need to add those positions. So we think about, here we go, adding things, right? It's dictated by this. So we'll figure it out. I think we have a pretty solid plan on how we can work with students and better equip teachers and do some things in that area, so.
So the challenge is that when you get the money and then you expand to add these programs that are required a specific way, when they pull the money back, then you have to kind of let those people go.
So,
right? Or
so this
reallocate.
money would be, these people would be paid for through the Fair School Funding Formula, specifically, around the gifted money. So if for some reason the funding formula would change and we would receive fewer, we'd have to evaluate at that point in time, are those services needed if we're no longer receiving the funding for it, which is really kind of how you got in the situation we're in now. We're required by law to identify gifted students. We are not required by law to serve gifted students, but they've now put money attached to that. And so basically they're mandating the service of gifted kids by saying, we're going to give you money towards it. And that's different than students on an IEP, right? Students with a disability, you're required to identify and you're required to serve. And so I think it's a great thing, honestly. I think it's a great problem to have, right? To figure out how to build a program that serves kids that are accelerating and gifted in this way. So, but it is, to your point, we'd have to make decisions if that funding were ever cut.
Yeah, that's the hard part, because then it
Yeah.
looks like we're, getting rid of
Dismantling
programs,
the program.
but it's not really, it's out of our control.
Yep.
Okay.
One of the other things that is included in here, a pretty significant change, are insurance rates. We never know what those are going to come in at, so our health benefits, that's a very expensive benefit, as anyone who works with people know. We budget 10%, just a safe number, hopefully safe number. You never know. A few years ago, that wasn't a safe number, but we came in at 5.2 this year. So a favorable year, that gave us some money. Not enough to make it this big of a change. The biggest change you will see here is the property tax. And you can see it's an interesting trend. The trend line down is still going down, but it's not as steep as before. So it's just an interesting dynamic we find ourselves in. Some of the things that we need to look out for. We don't have any idea yet what the substitute levy will do for us as far as growth. Because the substitute levy was passed with 12.2 million. That was our pot, right? Any new houses that come online, and then the next year they start paying taxes. So we're seeing the arrears effect right now. So we don't know what that impact looks like. As long as we have a lot of growth residentially, we think that will continue to grow as well. I just don't have a number for you on that. Property tax values, if those continue to change, up or down, that's going to impact us. Legislative changes, obviously. The other thing I wanted to mention, the pipeline is still not resolved. So we were getting a lot of money for the pipeline. They've sued to reduce their values. That case has not been finalized. So this does forecast a reduction because that's what we've been seeing. But if that would happen to be in our favor, that's going to shift this. Or if they get more than what we've projected, that's going to impact this. And that's a significant amount of money. So keeping those things in mind. Some of the expense side things that we're watching, energy prices have been all over the place. We've made some agreements to try to level those off, but they have been rising. So we'll see that. The purchase services, I've mentioned this several times, but our student needs have grown. We have a different population now coming out of COVID. We have different impacts that we're dealing with. And so we're seeing some of those purchase services needs just rise in cost. That's also part of, if you don't have staff, everyone's struggling for staff members. So your services tend to go up because you don't have the people to fill them. So you have to raise their wages. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then obviously we negotiate with 2 of our unions this year. So that will impact what's happening here. So looking at the bottom line, we have, again, if all assumptions hold true, we're going to see deficit spending starting this year and every year thereafter. It will push the need for new money out, according to this forecast, at least a year. Depending on how that plays out with property taxes, we may see that. We would love to see that expand a couple of years. But this forecast does show at least 1 year it will expand. So we've been saying fiscal year 26, but this does show 27. And then I just want to mention, I said the trend line was going down, but not as much. If you look at these numbers, you'll see it's very similar over those first 3 years, which again, just very, very unusual that it stays so close, but it's because of those big jumps in property tax. The other thing I mentioned to the CAT committee is our commercial property is very close to the 20 mil floor. So we're gonna see that in the next year or two probably, where we hit the 20 mil floor for commercial. So as that growth occurs, we'll get the full impact of that as well. So that could change things depending on how that factors in. So, key takeaways. Really positive outcome. However, we are starting our deficit spend. So it's a little scary when we know there are so many variables going on, and we just have to take a look at what is happening. And once again, just say to you, please reach out to your legislators. We are trying to tell our story. I know Isaac is reaching out and talking with them on the regular, which is awesome because they are hearing. They have shifted what they've been doing based on all the feedback from board members specifically, is what our groups are being told. So thank you for all that you're doing in that respect. And then also, now that we see some of these changes, we're going to come back to the table and say, okay, district-wide, what's curriculum look like? District-wide, what does all-day, everyday kindergarten do for our buildings, for our kids, for our community, and then look at any other big needs that we've just put on the back burner because we can't yet. So we'll take a look and start presenting numbers, evaluating how that impacts us in our district. So that was the big chunk. We'll go to the easy chunk now. We are 4 months in, just starting the year. We're getting close to 6 months, but you'll see the trend lines, they look pretty close. Currently, we're at 154 days operating cash. We think with the current forecast as forecasted, we'll be at 125 days by the end of the year, and our target is 120, so very close to that target. You'll see that all those lines are pretty much on top of each other, so it's really close to what we've done last year. It's very similar trends. So we're pretty much in line with where we have been in the last few years. The next slide talks about, at this time of year, we should be around 33%. So we've received about 42% of our revenues, which, as you know, we get our property taxes in 2 big chunks. So that's why we're over that 33%. I anticipate once that second half comes in, February, March timeframe, we'll be much closer. And then the expenditures, we're at 31% of the 33%, which is, again, good. You don't want to be too far over, you don't want to be too far under, so doing pretty good there. I think, in the expenditure side that we have a large payroll coming in November with supplementals, so I think that 31 will actually be very close to the 33 once we make that payroll. So really quickly, I'm going to read straight from my paper to keep myself safe, okay? I don't normally do this, but I'm going to do this time. I am not allowed to express my opinion on the passage of this levy. However, I will say that we will continue using the funds generated by this permanent improvement levy to maintain our 10-year capital plan in the most responsible way that we can. I can say thank you for voting, regardless of how you voted. In the last 2 elections, we have had record turnouts, and we appreciate that the community is involved in the operations of our district and giving us feedback. The closest we have come to this number of voters was in November of 2011, and we only had 12,339 voters then. You can see by these numbers of voters, we're having a big turnout. So just appreciate that the community is coming out and giving their opinions.
Any questions?
I do have one question. In the May 2023 forecast, you were estimating a deficit of 4 million.
Yes.
And now it's down to 2.7 million.
Yes.
I know I shouldn't ask this question, but what are your thoughts on how that's going to look in May of 2024?
I anticipate that we will not actually have a 2.7 deficit. I think it will be less. What I don't know is the value of property change that will occur in January. So we always get an impact every single year. I don't know what that looks like yet. So
And just to clarify, deficit spending, right? Not an actual deficit.
Not that,
Yeah.
yeah, the deficit spend.
I think we will still deficit spend. We were 200,000 away this year. I think we're going to hit a deficit spend, but I don't think it's going to be what this says.
Thank you.
Good. Reading through the list, item B is monthly reports. Mr. Severs or Mrs. Irvin, stop me anytime. C is amended appropriations. D is amended certificate of estimated resources. E is a fund transfer.
So I do want to talk about this one a little bit. We have, last month, I believe, the board approved the light pole, moving the light pole out. That was the $226,000, the change that we had to do for the turf. The $300,000 here is a transfer currently, unless the board wants to do an advance, in which case I just ask that you modify the language to say advance. What this does, this covers, we're going to be asking as part of the legacy project for community donations. We've been promised some of those, so when we went out for the debt issuance, we accounted for that. We didn't borrow the full amount of the donations, expecting the donations to come in. Well, the expenses are occurring before the donations are coming in. So we need to front that cost. And the question here is, if you do a transfer, the district is covering the cost. If we change it to advance, it will simply be covering it and then getting repaid. So it's really up to the board's discretion on, do you want to put down 300,000 towards that project, or do you want to just front that cost? So really up to you and how we spend this. I don't know that I have a preference, so I'm really looking for your direction on how we do that.
If they decide right now that they are just going to transfer the money, can they transfer money back out of that account when it comes in
No.
later?
It has to be used for PI projects. It doesn't have to be used for athletics, but it would have to be used for permanent improvements, so roofs, building, paving, those kind of things. It would stay in the PI fund.
My opinion is I would rather it be in advance, but let the group weigh in.
I'd agree with you. I think it should be in advance.
That way it's still an option, correct?
Yes. So can I get a motion to amend that, what is that, letter E?
Yes. So we need a motion to amend from to approve a transfer to approve in advance.
So move.
Second.
Do we need a roll call at this point?
Yes. Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item F is a list of donations, a pretty healthy list this month. Appreciate all of those that come in. G is approve the activity purpose and budget statement for LHS Recording Club, LJHS Spear Club, Indoor Track and Field, LJHS Student Council, and LHS Drama Club. H is the then and now.
So there are some descriptions in your packet, but basically we had some donations coming in through athletics, and we were working with them to get the budget purpose statement to you guys for approval, and it crossed wires, and it took a little bit longer than we were hoping for, so.
Item I is approve the revised fiscal year 24 exempt salary schedule.
I just want to touch base on that. That change is to reflect changes in the new food service position. So with the retirement of Patsy, which we'll have on the agenda, I think, later. I don't know, we already did that.
No, I think it's on here.
The requirements for food service director positions has changed dramatically since Patsy even took that position. They require a bachelor's degree and or an associate's in something food service related, dietetics, something to that level. So that position really required training and coursework and a degree. And so in order to find that replacement, we felt like we needed to adjust the salary schedule for that. So that's the reflection there.
Okay. J is a fund transfer.
This, you see this one pretty frequently. This is our grant funding where we receive Title IIA money. We just transfer it over to Title I and use it for Title I purposes.
Okay, and K is approving the 5-year forecast we just covered. So roll call, please, for
Mr.
items A through K. I'm sorry.
Yep, you're fine. Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item 8 is public records requests. Item 9 is the final, I need a motion to approve the final reading of 21 policies.
So moved.
Second.
I read through this list last time, so I'm not going to read through this list today. So roll call, please.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 10, other educational. Need a motion to approve the revision to the transportation handbook for the 23-24 school year.
So moved.
Second.
I don't have anything specific to mention there unless there's any questions
I
about
think
it.
the main thing there was that kids could use their cell phones as long as it's not distracting the driver. That was the main thing, right?
Correct, and I think that we requested, that was not uniformly being applied in all buses. And so that was clarified, and we requested for the handbook to change to make sure that that was in writing, that, quite honestly, the kid gets on the school bus and sits quietly and uses their phone and doesn't distract the driver or other kids around them, consider that a successful trip home off
Yes,
off the school
I
bus.
agree.
So
They
I
are
can tell you,
used-
there is a scramble for earbuds in the morning in our house, because they have to have the headphones in.
for the bus.
That's what I was going to mention,
Yeah.
the earbuds.
Yeah, so.
So roll call, please.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 11, personnel. I need a motion to approve items A through O.
So moved?
Second.
Thank you. Flip a coin on that second.
And Taylor Sechrist is retiring?
Taylor Sechrist is retiring mid-year.
I'm sorry, but.
So
Letter A is retirements. Go.
Okay, rewind. Taylor Sechrist is retiring?
yes, Taylor has been a longtime employee of the district, and a great supervisor of our maintenance grounds and custodial staff. But it's there have been changes that are happening at the SCRS, at the state retirement system level, and it came time where it was opportunity for him to go before some of those changes took place. And so he's going to go out mid-year. And then Patsy Tibbs, who was also a longtime employee of the district and our food service supervisor, she left at the end of October. And so we've had an interim in place for the last several weeks, Sherry Strange. And both of them did a great job leading, significant departments for our district. And how we replace them is a challenge, because, we've got to figure out the right way to, what's that role look like now in 2023 compared to, what it was when they started, or even how they functioned towards the end. So I wish Taylor and Patsy the best of luck. Deborah's going to be with us through the end of the school year, but those two leaving mid-year is a big change for our district. So, I'm assuming you mentioned that because you're similar age.
Just someone else that I grew up with.
Just somebody else you
that's
grew up with.
retiring.
Okay. Just want to make sure I pointed that
I
out.
see it. It's like, oh, man.
B is a list of resignations. C is a list of employees, employments.
So I do want to mention here Megan Grippa. So in keeping with the three changes I've now talked about, the change to the salary schedule, Patsy's retirement, Megan is coming to us from West Claremont, where she was the assistant food service director down there. She has a dietitian's background, a dietetics background, some experience working in school food service, young professional woman that we're super excited to get. She was able to start mid-year, which was even better. And so this will ultimately, for us, be able to change some of the things we've been doing in food service. We were contracting our menu creation and our dietitian support and things like that out to another agency because we didn't have a dietitian on staff. It's a new requirement that we have a dietitian on staff. So hiring somebody like her with the skill set that she has is a game changer for us. So I'm excited. Kid, she's going to be looking for some people to do food tasting and things like that. I may be in for that job. I don't know. But great ideas of things
Of
they've
course,
worked
it is
there.
low fat, so count me out.
Smoothie bars, coffee, things like that as options, possibly even at the high school level. So I'm hoping for some fun changes that kids will enjoy as well. So.
Okay. D is substitute employment. Always in need of substitutes. E is a list of supplementals. F is board resolution for non-licensed coaches. G is supplemental volunteer coaches. H is a couple change of status. I is a list of volunteers. We very much appreciate everybody that does volunteer their time. J is leave of absence. K is a list of stipends. L, list of game workers. M is approval of midday aid routes. N, seasonal workers. And O, home instruction tutors. Any other questions or comments on A through O? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton,
Yes.
Mr. Lane.
Yes.
Motion carried.
And finally, item number 12, need a motion to enter into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, or compensation of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Mrs. Cope.
Yes.
Motion carried.
You can all be excused. We will not be coming back in and vote on anything. So this can be the end of your meeting. You guys can head home.